Good afternoon, everyone. The webinar will begin shortly.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Joan Engebretson. I'm the editor at Telecompetitor. And thank you for taking time out today to discuss getting a BEAD on broadband funding. We very much appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to gain some valuable information about a topic that's really important right now. I also wanted to let you know that today's webcast is being recorded. Next slide, please. Before we begin today's webinar, I'd like to recognize and thank our exclusive sponsor, JLA Advisors. JLA provides end-to-end services in the areas of strategy, technology, and execution. The company's extensive experience in broadband, software, and edge allows its clients to capitalize on the world's most impactful technological trends and developments. Next slide, please. So our goals for today are to discuss key goals of the BEAD program and an overview of the application process, and timelines for planning BEAD projects, and aligning the economics and planning for BEAD projects. BEAD, by the way, stands for Broadband Equity Access and Development. It's a big funding program. You'll learn more about it momentarily. Next slide, please. So we have several people with us today with strong knowledge about the BEAD program. George Fuenzalida is a managing partner at JLA Advisors and has more than 25 years of telecom experience directing projects for wireless and wireline telecom carriers, equipment manufacturers, cable MSOs, and private equity companies in areas of wireless technology, corporate strategy, and wireless solutions. Prior to joining JLA, George was head of strategy and planning for Ericsson's digital services unit in North America. Prior to that, he was VP General Manager of Encode Consulting, which is a division of Ericsson, and he also held several other positions in the telecom industry. George has an MBA from Duke University's, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Fuqua School of Business, a BSEE from the University of Virginia, and is a CFA charter holder. Brooke Coleman is the senior manager and founder of the business development division of Widelity's compliance team, which focuses on federal broadband funding. Brooke has developed partnerships with other companies to assist clients in need of government funding assistance. Her expertise lies in federal broadband grant programs created by the American Rescue Plan Act, the IIJA, and other acts. With a background and master's degree in instructional practice, she aids clients in accessing the money they need for underserved and unserved communities in need of broadband assistance. She's based in Franklin, Tennessee. Rob Faulkner is the Chief Commercial Officer for T3 Broadband, where he leads strategy, marketing, and technology efforts. Rob has 30 years of experience in technology with increasing responsibilities ranging from engineering, product management, and operations through strategy, sales, and marketing. His primary responsibility at T3 is to determine the long-term positioning of T3 and the areas in which to invest. Rob has engineering degrees from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, as well as a Master of Management from the Kellogg Graduate School of Management at Northwestern University, focused on marketing and finance. I wanted to mention that attendees can use the Q&A tool on your screen toolbar to enter questions today. Feel free to enter those questions as they occur to you. You don't have to wait until the end to ask them, although we will wait until the end of the presentation period to answer the questions. I'm going to turn this over now to Brooke. Brooke, please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joan. So as Joan mentioned, at Widelity, we are government funding consultants and compliance experts. So to begin our conversation today, we are going to take a look at the available funding opportunities from a programmatic perspective. So first up, we are going to talk about BEAD. That's why we're all here, right? So as Joan mentioned, the BEAD program is a $42 billion program being run by the NTIA. I'm sure we've all heard very much about this program. So just going to keep this high level to sort of frame the context for our conversation in how to prepare for this program, as well as other funding opportunities. So BEAD is a very large program, the largest we've seen yet, to construct and deploy broadband networks with the ultimate goal to provide access to 100% of American citizens. So this funding is really going to be focused on the unserved and underserved areas that you're providing reliable, low latency, full coverage that is also affordable. So those are sort of some of the basic stipulations set out by the NTIA, as well as projects that are scalable, sustainable, resistant to climate change, and provide service to underrepresented groups. So those are some of the high level goals coming down from the NTIA. And so what's going to happen is the funds at the NTIA level are then going to be passed down to the states, and all 50 states are going to be given a bucket of funding to be able to run and implement their own program. So it's going to be important to understand from the federal standpoint what their rules and regulations are, but then the states are also going to have their own interpretations and rules around their state programs. So some additional key points for the BEAD program is, if you're going to apply to a BEAD grant, you're going to have to provide service of at least 100/20. And you will also have to bring at least a 25% match to your grant application. So again, there's a lot of details into the BEAD program. We could spend hours talking about it, but just trying to keep it high level for this conversation today as far as how to prepare for this program. So additionally, in lines with preparing for a program, it's important to know your dates and the deadlines and the timeline. So here's a high level timeline that we've put together. Right now the FCC is working on the maps, updating the maps as best as possible. And then on June 30th, the NTIA is going to use that mapping data in order to make allocation announcements and say, the state of Texas receives X number of dollars to implement their BEAD program. We are anticipating that applications to state BEAD programs will open up late 23, early 24. Again, every state is going to have a different application deadline. They're going to have different rules and different application requirements for every state. So this, timeline is very much an estimate, and it's just a prediction. We do not know. These are not hard set dates. It's just an anticipation. And then funds will be dispersed, we're anticipating around 24. And then the important piece to consider as you're planning your projects is you will have 4 years to then implement and complete your projects. So projects are estimated to be completed around 28. And so the BEAD program is massive, and it's something that we really need to prepare for now. And that's, the whole point of this webinar. But I also want to take a pause on BEAD just to mention some additional funding opportunities that are out there and available right now. So states have funding from the Capital Projects Fund, or the CPF, which is coming down from the Department of Treasury. And those are state level grants that the state can implement for broadband infrastructure. So the way I see this program is kind of a mini BEAD. Every state has different rules. Every state has different application requirements and different, timelines for how they're running their programs. So the Capital Projects Fund is a fund that's happening and open and a potential opportunity if you're interested in broadband funding right now. Additionally, through the American Rescue Plan, there is the SLFRF funding, which is additional potential funding for broadband. Counties and states have the choice to spend those funds on water, sewer, or broadband, but that is also another bucket of potential broadband funding. If you're interested in opportunities that are happening right now, there are opportunities now as you prepare for BEAD as well. So as part of this planning webinar, I want to take a moment to talk about the life cycle of a grant. If you've never applied to a grant before, you may not be familiar with what is entailed and how does the process work. So right now, for BEAD specifically, we are in the planning stage. And so during the planning stage, it's important to, identify which programs you want to apply for. Are you eligible? Which programs fit your need as a company and might be good for you to apply to? It's also important to reach out to your local government, both at the county level and the state level. They need to know you. You're going to need letters of support from your community. So it's important to start building those relationships now because that takes time. You will also want to tailor your project and your plan to the program. You're going to want to pick areas that are unserved or underserved in order to maximize your grant points on a grant application and start your design and your budget plans. And, Rob and George will talk about the details on how to actually do that here in a few moments. There's additional administrative requirements you're going to want to think about and start planning. Make sure your sam.gov registration is up to date. Think about documentation for how can you show your capability as a company from a technology standpoint, from an operations standpoint, and from a financial standpoint. How can you document and show to the state that you have these strong capabilities in order to handle multiple millions of dollars to implement a project? We are seeing more of late that states are requiring audited financials. I know that comes at a cost and is a challenge to get, and it can take a lot of time to get. But that is the way things are leaning towards, is requiring audited financials to submit an application. And you'll also want to plan your matching funds. How are you going to source your matching funds? Where is that going to come from? What is your plan? So then as you plan, then the application opens up. You will have approximately 1 to 3 months to submit an application and take all of that planning work that you did to put into narratives, put together a budget, an executive summary, and a lot of documentation and submit that for your application. Then your application will go through a cure phase where the state or the agency will send you an RFI or a request for information. They might ask you questions, ask you to change your project or correct any errors. Then after your application is reviewed, they will make announcements on who has been awarded and when the funds. And that is when you can begin your build out, start purchasing materials. You will have to start reporting any purchases that you've made, showing invoices, and keeping in compliance with the rules of the program along the way. We're seeing, typically there have quarterly, yearly, biannual reports, financial and technical reports that are going to be due along the way so that they have an understanding of your project as you move along. And then finally is the completion, submitting a final report and, completing your project before the deadline. So as you are preparing right now for BEAD, some of the key really to success is preparation. You're going to want to spend 3 to 6, 9 months if you can, researching, understanding programs, preparing, in order to have the most successful grant application. It's going to come around to the preparation and having a very strong strategy, a very strong plan. So it's important to invest your time into understanding the rules of the program, participating in those public community events, getting your name out there, and getting those letters of support and creating a solid design for a project that makes a sound investment, not only for your company's success, but also meets the requirements of the program and what the federal government is looking for in these projects. So start planning early. And I've talked a lot about, understanding the programs and, setting the stage for the programs. But now I want to transition it over to George from JLA in order to talk about more of the specifics on how to plan and what you need to look at and think about as you're planning for these opportunities.
Well, great. Well, thanks, Brooke. Again, this is George Fuenzalida from JLA Advisors. I saw a number of folks that had registered that are old friends and clients, so welcome. And then certainly many folks that are new to me. So I'm thrilled at the participation and the audience today, and also thrilled to be here with Brooke and Rob. So with regards to the business, when you think about it, the grant is the fuel, but the business itself is what you need to plan for, beyond just the grant. So you have to know your business. Many of you are small and regional ISPs, some are larger. The availability for grant money may be a game changer. And in addition, you might be sort of looking at new geographies, maybe looking to edge out or even move to different parts of the state. So from front to finish, you need to plan your business as if you were to plan it otherwise. And then, of course, the grants can help you with your initial builds. So understanding your market, your offering, your competition, both folks that are currently in and around that market, maybe close by, or brand new players that may choose to enter the market. As Brooke mentioned, it's now time to start aligning with the state. The state has many agenda items with regards to meeting the needs of unserved, underserved, and other communities, and being thoughtful and being positioned with them during this process in advance of your grant, but while they are busy putting together their broadband plans, it's highly recommended. And then, of course, this all rolls up into an economic and financial plan. So what I'm going to do is spend a few minutes on each of these topics, and then you'll see sort of how this rolls up. Well, first of all, with your markets and offerings, understanding the basic needs. Are you targeting a community that's unserved or underserved? And what does that look like with regards to their ability to consume the product, their willingness to consume the product in the future? Now, you may have other parts of your geography that are properly served, but now you're going to be competing against the incumbent or addressing your current customers. With regards to services and offers, you have the ability to layer on other services beyond sort of basic broadband and internet connectivity, certainly voice, certainly video. But for many of you, you may choose to go after the business market, the local businesses, the larger businesses, and use your infrastructure to broaden your appeal towards those businesses. What do those offers look like, and is this a new decision point for you in your journey? Once you've looked at that, you can then understand what is that addressable market, how large is it, does it make sense to consider this kind of expansion, and what may that look like from an overall sort of business and revenue perspective. But equally important is competition, and I challenge you this: that currently there are investors that are maybe not even considering the BEAD program, and are looking to connect America, and are currently investing in some of these same communities. So the competitors you see today, we now all have access to the FCC maps. You can see where the competitors are. Of course, the maps, while they've been under some scrutiny, they are the best source of information that we've seen, sort of in our lifetime, with regards to understanding who's where and what are they offering. We can help with you should be thinking about your competitive response and their competitive response. to both the BEAD program, but also if you now show up and are addressing a market that may have been under provided for in the past, what does that level of competition look like? Are we going from 0 to 1 or 1 to 2 broadband providers in these more rural markets? And as all that rolls up, what's your market share assessment? Can you get to 25, 28% of homes passed, or some threshold that makes this a viable business, even with the funding? So how do you do all this? It all comes down to data and geospatial. I mentioned the FCC data sets. You as an ISP have the rights to bring down that data in a more usable format and start crunching that. There's certainly no shortage of demographic data, both residential and enterprise. There's also the current telecom and fiber maps, not only your network, but other networks. And then overlaying all the other assets, whether it's rights of ways or state real estate or towers, et cetera, to be able to help you make a thoughtful plan. It's very important to stitch all that together, and usually through a geospatial lens. I mentioned aligning with the state, and that program is now many of our clients that I would say are on top of the game are very active currently with the state broadband offices, helping inform their plans, but also showing the thoughtfulness as to how to make the state be successful in winning their grants from the federal government, their share of the $42 billion plan. Many states already have a broadband plan published, or one that's close that is now getting edited. So certainly understanding what that looks like is step one. Many states have also put out information as part of that or in other studies around their assets. And that's very important to be able to incorporate a middle mile project that's out there, incorporate something that's in flight. Many of those projects have been funded elsewhere and will be very helpful for you to help connect your communities and your networks into the broader fabric from within the states. Certainly understanding your constituents and showing the state that you know your market, you know your constituents, and you understand some of the other underrepresented communities and community centers that'll be brought into play as well. And then finally, we can go back in time and the broadband stimulus programs that were available, let's say in 2009 to 2011, not all were successful. Many were very successful, but many weren't. And the issue was being able to operate and have an enduring business. And currently the states are very concerned about that the applicants not only need to have certainly their numbers down and have the right bid, but do they have that reputation and the plan to be able to have a lasting business that will serve the state for years and years and years, and to continually provide for these underserved communities. So as we bring it all together, certainly the data sets and the geospatial are tools to then help you make some of these decisions. But I would challenge you that as a independent entity, whether you're a smaller family-owned entity or a co-op, or you're now getting external funding, whether it's a private equity firm or a bank loan, that you need to bring it all together. And exactly as Brooke mentioned, audited financials and a sound financial plan is very important. So you stitch it together into a revenue plan, an operating plan, a network plan, and summary economics. And with regards to the network plan, I'm going to turn it over to Rob Faulkner here in a second. You've got many options there. Of course, there's a strong preference towards fiber and how the sort of the build thresholds have been designed by the BEAD program. But at the same time, there's also the countering piece of advice to keep the bid drawdowns as small as possible. So certainly some degree of wireless comes into play, even some degree of satellite. When you think about the corner cases and those last homes at the end of the road that don't have a cluster around them. So that's probably the most important and visible part of your overall strategies, how that stitches together, how you're using the BEAD funding, and then creating a platform going forward. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Rob Faulkner from T3 Broadband, who will take you through network planning and operational aspects.
Thank you, George. We look forward to working, and explaining exactly how this becomes real as you take the requirements that are needed for the BEAD program. And as George said, now you're taking the business aspect, the operational aspect, the network aspect. We'll be explaining how we make that all real. I like what George had previously on the slide previously, where he talked about the wheel and making that active. Well, the aspects that we take into account are 4 of these areas that I'll be speaking to that cover each of those domains. Basically, the revenue, operating, network plan, and summary economics can be now worked on more explicitly on looking at where you can serve the markets, the addressable market that George discussed. What can you serve? The technology plan, the actual, are you going to build fiber? Are you going to build fixed wireless? Are you going to have 120 minimum service? Are you going more for the gigabit service or higher? And then within that technology plan, can you actually deliver that to everybody you're supposed to? And then how much does that cost? And that kind of makes the strategy piece that George recommended that needs to be followed into, this is how you actually feed those areas. So the first area to discuss is where you can serve. The question, especially with the current status of the BDC mapping process, is trying to identify on a national basis those broadband serviceable locations that can be served and must be served as either an underserved or unserved market. In this area, I think will be bidding on a specific geographic area, but you may not always know where the homes or the businesses are within that. In this example, the photograph shows that, and this is almost a real world example that we see repeatedly with our customers, is that you're given a location address or some sort of identifying location parameter, and it may be in the middle of a field. It may not be any home, any business anywhere around that. So how do you identify and true up the numbers that you're supposed to serve with the actual numbers that you find within the bidding areas that you're trying to get that total addressable market? Again, in this example, you'll see that the 2 fields have no homes or locations on them. The home on the right seems to be a single business or single location that you can quantify as a BSL. But what do you do on the homes on the left? You have to identify, are those 2 individual homes, or is one a business, is one a home, is one an outbuilding and not? So it's important to look at not just the gross geographic area, but actually the locations within that, as George noted, with the different geographic data sets, the BDC mapping sets and other information to verify that. But that's not the only things you have to consider when you start looking at this from what do I want to serve from a technology, which I'll get to shortly. You want to take into account other factors such as terrain. Are you in a hilly location or a flat location? Do you have high density of homes versus low density of homes? Where are your middle mile connections? How are you actually going to get connections from the broader internet into your geographic area? And what other existing infrastructure? I can't tell you enough, especially in these unserved and underserved areas, the aspects of power coming in. There's no power poles in some areas of the Midwest. There are just vast swaths of areas out in the West that don't have power, don't have lighting, don't have anything. So you've got to take that into account into your build costs or other aspects to get there, along with weather and seasonality. I'll get into the technology, but you do have both a construction requirement, as Brooke noted, to be done by 2028. What is your build season? If you're in the upper Midwest or northern climates, you're not going to be building 24/7, 5 days, 7 days a week. Also, from a design standpoint, how does weather and seasonality work? If you're building fiber in a high wind area, does that have a higher cost associated with building aerial fiber versus buried fiber. And if you have fixed wireless, what happens if you are designing specifically certain aspects in the winter months, and suddenly the trees bloom in the spring and summer, and your degradation of service occurs because of the leaves or trees or other aspect. These all factor in, but it foundationally starts with where can you build in terms of the homes. Now, what can you serve? As I mentioned, there's really two primary solutions that are in play here. Fundamentally, you want to ask, what do I want to do? Do I want to serve the minimum service? Do I want to have a broad range of services? This comes back to the business plan in terms of your revenue factors and other things that you want to look at, your competitive piece, or as we'll get to, some of the areas that you might be building next to that you want to go address with your infrastructure. From our standpoint, really the two foundational technologies are going to be fiber or fixed wireless. They both have their pros and cons that I'll address here, but we have an approach on this that I think will be looked at by a lot of companies, and in fact, a lot of companies are doing that today in terms of a mixed approach. With fiber, you definitely have one-to-one coverage. If a fiber passes a BSL, you know that you can serve that BSL. However, that also leads to high construction costs, especially in low density population areas where you have a few homes with a long string of fiber. That costs a lot of money to build, but it does provide the symmetric bandwidth that a lot of states are looking for or requiring for some of the higher speed services. And of course, it has a very long life cycle for the fiber itself in the ground. But those costs are not trivial in some cases, especially for the low density areas. This is where fixed wireless, which has, instead of a one-to-one coverage, a one-to-many coverage, a single wireless transmission site can cover hundreds of homes in some cases, very economically, because you're passing all the BSLs that the tower can see. That tends to drive a lower to medium fixed construction cost that can still provide at the minimum 120 megabit service, even with 4G and LTE services, and 100 or higher symmetric services with 5G and even proprietary solutions. And so from a cost to serve basis, you can get a mix of capabilities here by looking at this from an overall network and speed requirements versus looking at just from all fiber or even in some cases all fixed wireless. We look at this as a what we call a hybrid approach that says using a combination in the denser areas of fiber and potentially low density areas with fixed wireless to give you the most capitally efficient approach to let those BEAD dollars go the furthest. Now, that'll be up to you and up to your requirements and up to what you look at as a business, which is where the strategy comes into play. But there are options out there to make this as capitally efficient for you as possible. Now, specifically, who can you serve, which is a little different from where can you serve. When it comes time to build, determining the specific homes that you can pass and verify at those speeds is going to be important. And you'll find that in many cases, again, with both technologies, whether fixed wireless or fiber, you can achieve very competitive speeds that are required by the BEAD program. But occasionally you're going to have the issue where you're going to have a home, fixed wireless maybe in a bad terrain area, it might have a lot of trees around it that block the signal, or it's going to be in a very high cost area that is very difficult to get fiber to. And you need to know that how that affects your BSL count against the requirements that you're being granted on the grant application. You may find that you have 5%, 10%, 2% that you can't serve. And again, from a cost standpoint, from a build and a cost standpoint from an operator, it's better to know that from a planning standpoint before you start digging, to know if you can actually serve the numbers you've got, either renegotiate with the state if that's allowable, or at least understand where you might have to make up some homes in other areas. But you can do this very well. You just have to assume that your planning is going to be critical to determining and verifying that you can serve the people you're going to be required to serve. The other portion of this, as George mentioned, in edge out markets, whether it's a business, whether it's an area just outside the geographic area that you want to, that you have to serve within your grant area, there is an infrastructure play here that you've got because you're putting fiber in the ground, you're putting fixed wireless assets, whatever that happens to be, that can allow you to become a competitor in an area next to yours Or midway through a build, maybe 2027, a new housing development goes up next to you that you can use it as a leverage point to get incremental revenue that was not planned as part of the original grant program. This looking at your TAM in whole, looking at the edge out opportunities and looking at the technology plans all comes into play in how you should be looking at the BEAD program, not just as a tactical, I have to serve so many homes in this area, but once I have that infrastructure in place, what can I do with that to leverage and get more economic growth for me? And then finally, and this goes back to the planning exercise that George mentioned that's needed for the BEAD program. What is your cost? What are your requirements that you're requesting for the BEAD funding? Based upon the number of locations you're serving, the geographic area, your technology, whether it's single technology, mixed technology, and your cost structure within your area of the country, you can start building up a economic model, a cost model, a capital model, and potentially an OpEx model to look at the cost to build your areas, the number of homes, the BSLs that you can cover, and then your cost per home passed, and see if that hits within the threshold required by the BEAD program, which is not set right now. There's talk that it might be $9,000 per home passed or lower, but that hasn't been set yet. That's still to be determined. But this gives you the economic input to George's program that you'll need in terms of the requests that you're looking for. And with that, I'll turn this back to Brooke.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. So I just want to kind of wrap it up and put it all together with a pretty bow on top and, remind us that, as you can see from George's presentation and Rob's presentation, that it is important and imperative to properly prepare for these grant opportunities. You're going to want 3 to 9 months to prepare a solid plan. Looking at Rob's maps, it could take a very long time to get that detailed down to every single home that you're passing, understanding the geographics and the cost and the economics and the operations behind everything in order to create a really solid plan. So it takes time to do all of these things and gather all this information. So we hope that this amount of information is not overwhelming, and a way to help with that is we put together this list here of what you'll need to apply. Here's a bulleted list for your planning. You're going to need a budget, mapping funds, maps, narratives, network plan, documentation, etc. And hopefully this little checklist here will be a helpful guide or tool as you are thinking about and preparing for these upcoming opportunities. And finally, I want to note that, everything you are planning, everything you're doing that George and Rob touched on, the revenue plan, the operations plan, the economics, the network plan, your maps, the geographic data, all of that really helps to create a solid and sound project plan and a business case for your project. But it also feeds into the narratives as you are going to prepare your applications. And when the application requirements get released from your state, they're going to want a narrative or a paragraph or, a couple of pages on what is your revenue plan, what is your operational capability, what is your plan to implement this project, what is your timeline. And they're going to want documentation upon documentation and narratives to support your project and your plan. So now I want to go to the next slide, please. Feel free to contact us, follow us on LinkedIn, reach out if you have any questions. And now I'm going to hand it over to Joan for the Q&A portion of this webinar.
Thank you, Brooke. So we do have some questions that people have already typed in, and I will remind everyone attending that you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to enter questions, and we'll take as many as we can. One of the questions we always get is, will there be a recording available? Yes, it'll be on our website shortly, or in a few days, I believe it is. I believe that we also send out a set of the slides to people who had registered, even if they weren't able to attend. So look for that if you had that question. I'm going to skip, several people had that question. And then one of the questions is the 25% match requirement for the state applicants? How does the panel anticipate match requirements rolling down to sub-grantees?
Yeah, so I can take a first stab at that one. What we're anticipating for BEAD is that there will be a minimum of a 25% match for subgrantees. If you're applying to a state BEAD grants program, you're going to want to plan to bring a minimum of 25%. We're seeing from the Capital Projects Fund, what I call the mini BEAD, that the more match percentage you bring to the table, the more points that you're getting on your grant application. So the more, the better, but it will be a minimum of a 25%. Whether that is cash or in kind will probably be up to the state and how the state defines those terms, but it's definitely something you want to start preparing for now.
And what I've seen, Brooke, is the lower density areas tend to have the lower match. When you get to higher density, there is tending to be a drive from the states to require more than 25%. So very rural markets that have very low population density will probably stay at the 25. But as you move into the urban or ex-urban markets or the urban markets, I would expect that that match goes up.
Yeah, that's right. And the just one final point is that the funds are generally not able to be drawn from federal sources, with the exception of certain of the very recent federal programs that are tied to broadband, but certainly private sources, as Brooke mentioned, possibly some in-kind as well. And each state will then come out with sort of their rubric on that question.
Okay. The next question is, are there a group of consultants or key organizations that are focused on informing the states of the different broadband models and options in the marketplace?
So I know, go ahead, John.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Yeah, certainly there are, the states all got funding planning funds, and they were understaffed. So the states very quickly over the last 3 months, 6 months, year, have been staffing up, some with hiring full-time employees, some with hiring contracted subject matter experts, and some with bringing in firms. And you can see some of those publicly available RFPs where some firms have come in. And the background is a bit mixed, because you have to have a skill set in geospatial and mapping and understanding, that piece for the states that hadn't developed their plan. You also have a very important outreach program. We talked a lot about the BEAD, but there's also the digital equity piece. So having connectivity to the states and being able to work with the constituents that'll benefit from this program as well. And then simply the telecom expertise as well. So there's a variety of skill sets. Many of those end up having sort of several different entities coming together for the states that need that broader help. But certainly, we're a consulting firm, so yeah, we're proud of our services, as is the others on other panelists. But certainly, there are others that are participating in supporting the states.
Yeah, and I'll also add to that from conversations I've had in the industry is that there's vendors out there, wireless suppliers and vendors, as well as fiber suppliers and vendors that are talking to the states and educating them on the various different technologies and the speeds that can be offered and served with their various technologies that they have. And then finally, there's also associations that are advocating to the states. There's the Fiber Broadband Association, Rural Wireless Association, and et cetera. There's a handful of them that talk to the states and educate the states on the technology pieces and the speeds and sort of the technical aspects that the states might need a little education on.
The next question I have is, can you clarify the note? And I think this note was in Brooke's presentation, if I'm not mistaken, that SLFRF, that's a state and local funds, can only be used for broadband from the county allocation, not municipalities?
Sure. So I can clarify a little. So the SLFRF, the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, is a mouthful, and it is funding that was distributed to the county. And so then the county can choose if they want to spend those funds on broadband, water, or sewer projects. So there's flexibility with those funds, but I mention it as a potential opportunity because many counties have used portions of those funds to fund local broadband projects that are happening. And the funds do go to the county, and then every county is kind of structured a little differently. So sometimes the county can shuffle it down to a city or to a smaller entity within the county, but the county is the ultimate manager of those funds.
Okay. And then there's a question for Rob. Does a fiber subgrantee have to pass serviceable within 10 days of service request? That was in parentheses. All broadband serviceable locations in their grant area, or just those locations in their grant submission? Will this lead to perpetuate coverage gaps and unserved islands like we see today, or would states require subgrantees to cover everything in an area?
I'm not sure I quite understand the nuance of it. My approach to answering is, if you have a set of a number that you have to pass to get your locations down, your BSLs down, and you submit that to the grant, you'll probably be submitting that as part of your grant application, the actual location data itself. Those are the homes you would be you must guarantee to get service once constructed, to get service activated within 10 days. If incremental areas following what RDOF and the CAF2 auction have, I think that's a negotiation with the state itself in terms of how that may impact plus or minus if things happen. I hope that answers the question.
Another question here is, are states required to post their state broadband plans for review or comment by the public?
Yes, I believe they are required via the BEAD NOFO in order to publish those state broadband plans and get feedback and comments from the public in order to modify and make sure that it matches. There's a community outreach aspect to the BEAD at the state level, where they are required to, host events and talk to the local community in order to get their feedback for the digital equity program as well as the BEAD program.
Okay.
And let me add on to the next phase of that, because we didn't really talk about that today, and that's what they call the initial plan and the final plan. So after all this, the states will then put together their plan as to how to address all of these needs, and those get submitted to the federal government. But there is a process to comment on that and challenge it from folks inside of the state. The NTIA can be an advisor into that process, but the point is that, of course, that'll be public, and of course that'll get scrutiny. And so there's certainly that, as we continue through the process in the coming 12, 18 months, there will be quite a bit of public dissemination of what's happening.
Okay. The BEAD NOFO, pardon me, the BEAD NOFO includes and they put this in quotes, a project may constitute a single unserved or underserved broadband serviceable location in support of smaller subgrantees. That's the end of the part that was in quotations is past now. But lots of the compliance and funding requirements favor large subgrantees. Do you think BEAD funding is truly for all comers, or favors large providers like funds of the past?
It's a little bit of a crystal ball, and I'll choose my words carefully, but I think Rob made the point that maybe in closer to urbanized areas, folks will be submitting for less less BEAD funding. So I'm here in Atlanta, and maybe there's some areas, even as we've noticed in the site, that are fairly close to downtown Atlanta that are considered underserved, and maybe that will be a fill-in from some of the current broadband providers, and probably less of an opportunity for a brand new person to come in and create that island. At the same time, I think the devil will also be in the details on just how the money gets dispersed. So I've heard people express concern that if a state says, hey, build the network and then we'll pay you the money, well, that's certainly going to advantage more capitalized people, banked people. But if it's more of a tranche-based approach that works with smaller entities, then that can be favorable. So I do think that depending on how each state comes out with some of those kinds of rules, you'll maybe see some be interpreted more as small company friendly or big company friendly. And there's probably other aspects. Your question is an excellent question. There's likely 2 or 3 or 4 other key attributes that would go into even a more full answer.
And just to add to that, if you look at the CAF2 program, the original CAF2 program, which went all to the state carriers, the ILECs, and then they went to the CAF2 auction with the FCC and the RDOF auctions, they purposely were trying to expand out. You still needed to get an ETC status from each state PUC that you served, but they tried to get new entities. And I saw there were a number of individuals that were getting funding, cooperatives, not the classic rural cooperatives, but cooperative organizations, municipalities getting funding. So I think that the goal here is to get broadband in any way possible. And if the states learn from what they've seen successfully in the past by broadening and being much more inclusive of new entities coming in, if they have the controls in place with the planning, with the strategy, with the technology roadmaps, I think it can be done by just about anybody who applies that has a good plan.
And I think the final note I'll add on this question is that this is why it's so important to advocate at your state broadband office right now. As they are building and creating these plans, they need to hear from all different types of providers and understand as they create their rules what the consequences are. If they require a 25% letter of credit for a grant application, that's going to exclude some smaller providers that don't have the cash on hand or ability to get a big, large letter of credit. And all the devil is in the details, like George said. If they put specific details into their rules and programs, that could exclude specific smaller internet service providers. But that is why it's important to advocate to your state broadband office, make sure they know who you are and the quality of local service that you provide, and that you really are already in these areas providing service to the unserved and underserved, and you simply want to expand your network and not to exclude you by a line item in the rules that they create.
Next question, do any of the federal broadband funds contemplate assisting with any operational expenses following placement of networks, or are funds limited to capital infrastructure funding?
So the programs that I discussed today, BEAD, Capital Projects Fund, SLFRF, and as well, I didn't mention, but the Reconnect funding, those are all limited to infrastructure. They are all infrastructure grants in order to build capital infrastructure. Operational expenses are not included as an eligible expense in those programs.
We haven't seen that, Joan. I would expect that to follow, as Brooke said, just the CapEx.
I mean, in theory, that's what the Universal Service Program is for. And that one, used to be the main source of funding for construction and ongoing operations. And there's some talk maybe it'll end up more like just the thing that keeps the network going after they're built. So, but no one knows what's going to happen there yet either. Can you address the low cost option requirement in the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity? Will participation in the Affordable Connectivity Program be sufficient to meet that requirement?
Yes, we've seen that so far with the Capital Projects Fund. It is required to offer a low cost option as you are an applicant, and that will transfer over into the BEAD program as well. They require a low cost option, so participating in ACP will be sufficient. But there will probably be an option that if you have an individual separate program that you've set up yourself, that could potentially qualify as well. But as a minimum, participating in ACP is a good idea.
There is a question here. How does this program, and I'm not sure which one they mean, but maybe you all have a guess at this. How does this program align, probably the BEAD program, align with other grant programs such as RDOF and the Secure Network Act?
I'll take a first stab at this.
Okay.
It probably more aligns with RDOF and the CAF2 auction and ARPA, much more than the Secure Networks Act, which is targeting very specific Chinese-made equipment that is in existing networks today, and it's what we call the rip and replace program. It's to fund the replacement of an existing network, not building a new network. Versus RDOF, CAF2, Reconnect, all these are about building new and expanding to areas that are unserved and underserved.
And to add to that, Rob, I think the important thing to understand is that there's different ways the government can distribute funds. There's grant funding, which is going to be BEAD, Capital Projects Fund, and the programs we talked about today. RDOF is a reverse auction. And so the way a reverse auction works is whoever is the lowest bidder is going to win. So you're going to say, okay, I can, service this census block for X dollars. And then someone else is going to come in and say, no, I can service this for X dollars. And whoever has the lowest bid is going to be the winner of that census block. Then finally, the third, type of program is the Secure Networks Act, which is the Huawei Rip and Replace, as a reimbursement program. And so that program is, like Rob said, as they are ripping out or replacing the Chinese equipment, they then get reimbursed for doing that work. So it's just, there are three different models as to how the government funds come out to the public.
We're starting to run short of time, but there's still quite a few questions here. I'm going to try to get to as many as we can. So one of the questions is, do you anticipate or have you heard that states will require value for money models to validate public-private partnership proposals?
Yeah, I have not heard of that. We can certainly look back into that with regards to aligning with PPP, public-private partnership, PPP. That is certainly an important aspect that is being heavily considered as folks are coming forth with their applications.
Yeah, I think it brings a stronger stance to an application to have a public-private partnership. That's definitely what the pattern has been, and the value has been to applicants that we've seen so far. It's going to depend on the rules for every state and if they assign additional points to your grant application.
If a successful bidder ultimately determines that a location is uneconomic, will bid default penalties work similar to the RDOF program?
I think that's to be determined. I don't think the rules have been defined fully yet for that.
I think it'll be important to understand too, this is a grant. So you're writing an application saying you're going to service, 1,000 locations with $1 million, and you're going to propose your plan. You're going to say, this is what I want to do, and this is how much I need to do it. And then you will either get that approved or not. If you get that approved, then, you will have allocated that $1 million to service those locations. And then if you cannot meet those standards, there are going to be consequences, and that will be probably outlined in the NOFOs at the state.
Will FWA, fixed wireless, utilizing GAA, that's the I forget what it stands for, but it's the
CBRS.
basically
Yeah.
it's
Open
CBRS. Yeah, it's the basically the unlicensed portion of the band. Will that be considered licensed for BEAD purposes?
It is. The FCC calls it licensed by rule.
Yep.
And therefore we're treating that, and our customers are treating that as allowable.
Yep, I heard that as well. And then there's a question: can the state and local FRF or other funds be used for matching funds?
Yes, so ARPA funds can be used for matching funds in the BEAD, and it's in the BEAD NOFO.
I'm checking on time. I think we can squeeze in at least one more.
Just on that, I mean, there are, I think, three other federal programs that are allowable. Most federal programs are not. And then to the question, other state programs or Appalachian Regional Commission or entities like that are allowable.
Okay. The BEAD program guidelines favor build out to unserved areas, but also allow grants for underserved areas. Do you have any tips on how to apply for increased competition in underserved areas, for example, to add additional providers in an area?
I'll take a swag. Underserved says that you can't, you're serving above 25.3, but below 120. There could be a single provider there. It could be multiple providers there. But again, what BEAD is allowing you to do is saying that you will have the funds to go build at least 120 service, if not higher, depending upon what you've selected. Does that drive competition or not? That's part of the strategic plan that you'd have to look at. And in fact, you yourself may be overbuilding your own network to increase those speeds. I think the other part of this that hasn't been discussed is you can use BEAD funding as a defensive measure if you see an area that you're trying to grow to, and you can get 120 service there and you get the funds, you're preventing a competitor from getting there also. So you have to look at this as a growth opportunity as well as a defensive measure within your operating territory or your edge out operating territories to look at how you can expand and protect your own interests as well as potentially grow at the expense of an existing carrier there.
I want to try to squeeze one more question in because I'm interested in the answer to this one as well. And then there's a few I'm sorry we won't get to, but they will be shared with the panelists. Does anyone have any thoughts on what will happen with the remaining RDOF allocation? There was supposed to be 2 phases to RDOF, and what's going to happen with the next phase? Any thoughts?
I think it's a great question, and it's very, very unknown, which is why we're
Yeah.
all hesitating. But I mean, I think they're going to wait. I think they're going to wait until BEAD gets deployed and gets moving and all of those funds get dispersed and they start seeing action, because that's going to make a huge difference on the marketplace and what areas to mark as served and underserved and unserved, et cetera. So that's, I think it remains to be seen and will be a while before we see anything with a second round of RDOF.
And considering it was USF was used to fund it, maybe it'll go back into the USF pool. I mean, there's a lot of options out there. We don't have any idea what could happen either, but I agree with Brooke. I think it's going to be a while before those funds are either dispersed to other carriers or used for something else.
We have run out of time. So this is a great discussion today. I think everyone learned a lot. I want to thank all of the panelists and also everyone who logged in to listen today. Thank you all so much.
Well,
Thank you,
Joe.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.